Hi, this is Jim Cranston from 7 Every Minute and 7everyminute.com, the podcast and website about reimagining your life. Thanks for joining me today to talk about, the recent violence that we had over the past weekend and what each of us might do about that. So let's get started. If you like what you hear tonight, please leave a like, subscribe, tell your friends, send me a message. Thanks for joining me tonight to talk about not just the recent assassination attempt. I mean, obviously, that's a huge story, but really the long history that's been leading up to it. And I'm not talking about weeks or this campaign or anything else. It's much longer than that. First, on a slightly more upbeat note, if you were with me last week, I was approved to adopt Rocket the dog, which is pretty exciting. Remember, I can't remember if I shared this picture or not. I don't have it with me right now. But there's some logistical issues, as I may have mentioned, since he's about 2,300 miles away. But I'm sure the answer will become clear. But on to tonight. So as I mentioned, tonight's really about getting back to the basics regarding what it means to live in a community or a society. You know, it can be a big community like an entire country or a little community like a family. One of the most important aspects of any community of any size or a society is that there has to be at least three critical aspects present for it to work. And those are there has to be able to be compromise, there has to be discussion and communications, and there has to be mutual respect. And if you take any one or more of those away, of those three core requirements, you end up with basically just a mess, as is clearly visible on a daily basis as we look around the world, at this and other countries, our communities, and even into many families. This obviously came to a head, yet again on Saturday, July 13th, 2024, for those of you looking in the past or in the future. Violence and war, address this to Mr. Putin. War, Mr. Putin, that's not the pinnacle of power, but rather it's the pinnacle of failure. But it isn't just the start of the cause. It's, you look at the event, whether it's the war or the violence, whatever, and you say, oh, that's what's to focus on. But it's not really there. In the U.S. and elsewhere around the world, intolerance and self-absorbed attention, these have become the hallmarks of modern society. This is something that happened, I'm trying to think the first time I read about this, probably 30 years ago, right? Think you'd look cooler if you had new sneakers? Kill that person, take their sneakers. Think using drugs is a victimless crime? Go anywhere in South America and see the cartel damage. Or try walking safely in almost any major metropolitan area, not just in the US, anywhere in the world. And you'll see firsthand the ravages of unrestrained self-pleasure. As they say in Latin America, we don't have a drug problem. The US has a drug problem, and that's enabled the cartels to destroy our countries. So some 20-year-old dude has heard enough to make him think that the most appropriate action for him to take was to grab a weapon and try and eliminate what, most likely, someone else had described as being unworthy of living. In this case, presidential candidate Trump. That situation is really worth pondering. Those thoughts didn't just pop into his head. Something put them there. And I'm going to pick on one of the candidates right now. Hold your judgment because the other one's coming up right after. The Biden campaign and friends have for weeks been referring to former President Trump as Hitler, Mussolini, Putin, and more, and directly calling him a Nazi and the ultimate threat to democracy. And while the inflammatory rhetoric was briefly paused over the assassination attempt weekend, this morning I immediately again started getting Biden campaign emails with the same apocalyptic warnings and labeling that I was getting on Friday. And who's the threat to democracy here? President Biden, when we had one of his illegal debt cancellation programs overturned by the Supreme Court, boasted, didn't just say boasted, he would find a way around it, and wrote a second executive order, which was also overturned. We elected a president, not a monarch, and new laws and their funding have to go through Congress. That shouldn't be news to anyone, especially the president. Which isn't to let Mr. Trump off the hook even one iota. He's been busy calling some countries by disparaging names and vilifying entire cultures because of a few bad perceptions. And yes, there are perceptions, because the data doesn't back up the accusations. not to mention disrespecting pretty much anyone either in or out of his sphere, except for himself, for whom he has endless grace and total justification and utmost admiration. So what we have here is not only the basis for an entire political breakdown, it's also a strong catalyst for a cultural and societal breakdown. Thomas Sowell, if you don't know him, look him up. He's awesome. I've been reading him for literally decades. He's a noted conservative author and thinker. Wrote a very good opinion piece today, actually. And in it, he essentially says a very similar thing. He says it isn't new. In 1992, the New York Times published the names of the jurors who acquitted the officers who used force when arresting Rodney King. The story also identified the communities in which they lived and other identifying information so that people could protest at their homes. Senator Chuck Schumer was addressing a protesting mob outside the Supreme Court and identified two justices by name, saying, quote, "You have just released the whirlwind, and you will pay the price. You will not know what hit you if you go forward with these awful decisions," end quote. Spoken like a mature, law-abiding senator, yes? Absolutely not. It was an open threat to members of the Supreme Court, and someone with a weapon was later found and stopped outside one of the justices' house. Free speech is often used as the basis for such actions, but illegal actions and threats don't become legal because of the First Amendment. The bigger problem is that when one side gets away with this, well, guess what? The other side ups the rhetoric too, and very quickly it escalates into threats and violence, as we have just witnessed. This isn't to blame one party or the other, or one candidate or the other. This is very much to blame both parties and both candidates and all these candidates who are saying these things, basically without limit. Biden campaigned on bringing the country together and abandoned that promise immediately and was purposely extremely divisive. Trump campaigned on helping little people and immediately ignored pretty much anyone, little or big, who he felt hadn't properly supported him. This isn't a rant about politics or candidates. This is about getting the entire country to just grow up on both sides of the aisle, across the entire political spectrum, and going back to those three core requirements for a functioning society. There has to be compromise, there has to be discussion and communications, there has to be mutual respect. Some of the most disrespectful conversations I have had the displeasure of ever being in were with the be kind liberals attacking me personally for not being liberal enough to their taste. Well, what were the settings, you might ask? Was it a debate or something? No. One was at a contra dance following an introduction to this fellow when I was immediately verbally attacked by him because my brother was on the county assembly. One was at a dinner where the couple had invited me to come over and then essentially attacked me for over 2 hours and called me names. One was I was paying for a dinner for a dear friend who generalized me, and those conservatives are all just pieces of, and you can figure out the sentence how it ends. For which I thanked him and reminded him who was taking care of him, and the list of these events goes on. In every case, all three core requirements for civil society were completely ignored. Remember them. There has to be compromise, there has to be discussion and communications, there has to be mutual respect. Even if you bona fidely think the other person is just a total jerk, stop. Ask yourself why, and better yet, ask them to please explain their point of view. This widening chasm of division is literally destroying our society and turning the country into a place that, quite frankly, is not very nice. And even worse, although much of it was started by bad state actors on social media, people take the bait and they just run with it. I have a dear friend, and the things he writes to me are unbelievable. I have called him out on a few of them, and it turns out he barely even reads them before forwarding them. I'm like, then why are you subscribing to this drivel, and why are you sending it to others? I think it's partly because everyone wants to think they have kind of an inside scoop on things, the real truth. And social media has allowed every sort of conspiracy theory and bizarre thinking to just flourish, again, across the entire political spectrum. Okay, so what to do about it? First, think before you speak. Really, really think. Don't just repeat what you just read. Does it even make sense? The fairgrounds weren't even cleared out yet before there were posts on social media about how, quote, Trump staged this whole event and how, quote, the Democrats had hired a hitman to kill Trump within minutes. And of course, many horrible wishes for one outcome or the other from both sides. Think about what it really says about a society and its members when someone wishes death upon someone else. Just like war, it's an abject failure in all social skills, in all social states. When you disagree with something you hear, remember the other person got to that conclusion somehow. They didn't just have it pop into their head from nothing. When you ask them to explain it, you'll get some insight and be better able to respond or understand or discuss. When you discuss something, remember that it's always important to maintain that mutual respect. Show respect for the other person, and if they aren't respectful, ask for respect back or end the conversation. That is what I did with my friend who I'd taken out to dinner. He thought about it and apologized to me. When I tried to de-escalate with the couple who had invited me over, they started ridiculing me. I just called it a night and never had contact with them again. Oh well. Everyone deserves respect, especially those with whom you disagree. Everyone also deserves to be listened to, even when they're ranting. But the rant has to be respectful, and you have the right to be heard as well. If it isn't mutual, try to part cordially in the hope that they'll realize they could have behaved and handled it a little better. Finally, there has to be compromise, but that compromise has to be a two-way compromise. It isn't always one side tolerating the other and slowly losing. We've seen that in action. That isn't compromise at all. But the biggest thing, which I didn't explicitly say yet, is that for all our supposed differences, and I've said this in many past episodes, but for all our supposed differences, we have far more in common, especially in the U.S., than we have in difference from each other. We have become trained to think that any little thing is a drop-dead, no compromise allowed, earth-shattering, life-ending decision. That just is not so. So many of the horrific things we see, like someone having trouble understanding a new payment machine at the checkout, is presented on social media as nearly the end of the universe. Simply get over yourself and life's little challenges. Want to make a difference? Instead of immediately starting to text and rolling your eyes and making loud sighs about how inconvenienced you feel, how about smiling, asking if you could help? You might actually get a sincere thank you back and have a nicer rest of your day instead of another reason to feel put upon. And we've talked about this repeatedly. Each and every one of us has the power to change what's going on right around us. Maybe in a teeny way, maybe in a little way, maybe in a big way. And when enough of us decide that we want to work together, instead of being annoyed about everything, hopefully we can get back to the point where relationships and living life in harmony matter more than social media likes and trying to make a false public image to hide our own self-anger. And from that, when somebody shortly out of high school is feeling confused, when they feel confident to take a chance and maybe talk to some friends, instead of killing one or more innocent people because some grown-up infants on stage were publicly disparaging each other, then maybe when that happens, maybe we can make a difference instead of disparaging the rest of the population by bringing it together. Because that population is us, and we're better than that. We're better than our leaders because we have real things to live for besides our own self-image. So that's it for the evening. A little long, a little intense, but a pretty important topic. Each one of us really does have the power to change the world for the better. It may not be a huge change, but many little changes can lead to big results and bring us back together, one kind conversation at a time. Your homework, always optional, is to imagine a situation where you wanted to be annoyed, or perhaps were annoyed. Now put it into the context. Were you really annoyed at something external to yourself, like that other person, whatever? Or perhaps, was it really because of a situation you had created and caused, such as maybe being late, forgetting something, or just having a bad day because of something else? Extra points if you revisit that same situation and reframe it such that it becomes a lesson for yourself and also an opportunity to show grace and support for someone else. Think about how you feel about it now. Hopefully, it feels a lot better and can guide you when that sort of situation happens again. So, that's it for the evening. Put up our regular reminders, ukr7.org. Um, Obviously, the war in Ukraine is going miserably all the way around. Wars in Mideast, just um, stuff going on in Africa, and it's just the world's a wreck right now, and it's for the reasons we just talked about. But if you can and you're able, ukr7.com. If you don't want to be directly involved with them, World Central Kitchen, they work worldwide, providing food after and other care, primarily food though, after natural disasters and other emergencies and things like that. Great organization, both great places to support. As I said many times, if you can support one of the groups listed there or that they point to, that's great. If you want to support somebody locally, that's great too. But if you don't have the money, don't want to spend the money, just not your thing to do that, put yourself out there a little bit. Just smile to somebody. Just make one person's life a little different. Think about the fellow who is going to climb up on the roof and try and assassinate a presidential candidate. It's kind of a lot to say, but maybe if when he walked into the store, someone said, "Hey, how's it going today? Beautiful day out, isn't it?" Maybe that would have been just enough to make him think just a little bit, even if it didn't change his mind completely. Kind of, what if I kill somebody else by accident? Is that really what I want to be accountable for? You never know how much effect something as a simple smile, a simple hello, showing a little grace to somebody else can make, not just to you and that other person, but perhaps to the whole world. Remember that one of the best ways to care for yourself is to care for others. Live outside of yourself. Truly empathize with the people around you. So that's it for the evening. As always, thank you for stopping by. If you found something interesting and useful, please pass it along. Please subscribe and hit that like button. And if not, please drop me a comment as to what you'd like to hear. I hope you have a great week. Remember to live the life that you dreamed of, because that's the path to true contentment. Love and encouragement to everyone. See you next week on 7 Every Minute and 7everyminute.com. Thank you.